Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the CFIURC Operations Coordinator. I would like to officially open the third of our 2025 sessions in our Emergency Management in Hospitals and Healthcare Speaker Series, presented in partnership with the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Center. I would like to begin today with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Tkaronto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event, our participants may be joining from various locations, so I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our moderator, our speaker, and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Misha Richard. Misha Richard is the current Emergency Preparedness Lead for the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Center in Thunder Bay, Ontario, in Canada. In this role, she acts as a subject matter expert, assisting with the development and maintenance of emergency management governance, training materials, and exercises. Misha also volunteers as an editor for the Canadian Journal of Emergency Management and is happy to be a collaborator and facilitator for the CFL York series. She holds a Master of Disaster and Emergency Management degree from York University and bachelor's degrees from Western University and Brandon University in the focus areas of political science and disaster studies. Misha, thank you very much for moderating today's session and your ongoing help in putting this series together. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So it's been a little while since I've done a brief intro, so I'm going to do that first before I give our warm welcome to our speaker for today. So bear with me for one moment and I will share my screen. I'm going to do the usual switcheroo here. Give me one moment. Okay, so hopefully you can see I want to do a brief introduction about Code Aqua for you today because this is not as common as some of the other color codes, which is something that I also wanted to briefly touch on, respecting the fact that we do have participants on this series that are from outside healthcare or are newly entering healthcare or are newly entering emergency management in general. So you want to make sure that you have a quick overview of what we're getting to today, not to take any steam out of our presenter's sails, but to kind of segue into her presentation for today, hopefully. So first, quick history. Hospital emergency color codes. The initial goal was to reduce the chance of human error and confusion. So having something that was really short and sweet being announced overhead, going with the color format. This was something that was essentially adopted Canada-wide back in the 90s. There's been a couple of additions since, so Code Silver and Code Purple came about later after this original thumbs up from across the board. And I'm not here to talk about any sort of debate of plain language. There's lots of discussion around what these code groups are. Also respecting that some organizations have different resources, have multiple buildings, and so sometimes there's different stages or levels to these codes. But so this is to give you a quick snapshot of the ones that are the most common, again, in case we have any new attendees to the series. And then, so I'm going to mention Code Gray here. Now, why am I doing that? Code Gray is a part of that overarching collection that's been predominantly accepted. And these are where you end up having a disruption due to a loss of infrastructure, essentially. So it could be the loss of utility, like losing water. It could be a loss of network or an impact to the physical building structure. Now, if something is a smaller scaled incident involving loss of water, or flooding, that may, for some organizations, trigger a predetermined response team. So something like a maintenance stat call. I know some folks are in older buildings and frequently have, some pipe issues. So that's something. And that would be separate from going all the way to a Code Gray infrastructure activation at their organization. Respecting that sometimes if there's localized flooding or a loss of water, that might activate something that gets referred to as downtime plans or business continuity procedures. That's sort of an and or that might be included. And then also, if something is common enough at an organization or really specific enough, and this is where we're going to end up hearing from Lisa, it might require having this dedicated Code Aqua response. So again, it's not a part of that overarching group of codes that was accepted because those were the most commonly applied, but respecting that different hospitals and healthcare organizations have different needs and deal with different hazards. And so that's something that's been developed. So what is a code aqua then? Well, it applies to a significant water event, either internal or external, which interrupts those operations and negatively impacts patient care. So it could be overland flooding. Do you live next to a river or a lake? Is that a consideration? Where my hospital sits, we don't have that as a potential hazard on our list. Or is it something like I said, pipes bursting? If it's not just a leak in the wall that's considered to be minor, is it something that's major and you want to be prepared for that and have a dedicated response? And so this is where you're seeing, and again, here, just giving a reference point that shows another organization that's using this, and they've got this Aqua Flood as being the tagline for it. And so just also want to highlight that typically if you have external flood related water emergencies, so that overland flooding, high water events based on where the facility is located, those typically impact functions that are situated in the lower levels of the building. And so that can include, like facilities, sterilization, materials management, all those sorts of things. So I just wanted to give you a really quick snapshot before going over to our speaker today. So hopefully that's enough of an intro for you. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Lisa, somebody else that's up here in the north. So Lisa Tarini was actually born and raised in Sudbury, Ontario. She currently works at Health Sciences North as the Emergency Preparedness Advisor. As a true Northern gal, she obtained her Bachelor's of Science from Lakehead University and went on to obtain a diploma in radiation therapy from the Ontario School of Radiation Therapy. For the next 20 years, she worked proudly all the way up through radiation therapy department as a therapist to clinical educator and finally to a supervisor. And in 2015, her passion for process improvement took her to a quality improvement consultant role at Health Sciences North, where she's focused her attention on improving time to inpatient bed, accreditation readiness, and critical event analysis. Looking to combine her process improvement and quality and patient safety thinking, she transitioned to the Emergency Preparedness Advisor role back in January 2024. And it's in this role that she sees the most potential, for exciting system change. She looks forward to leading the transition from paper-based emergency response plans and documentation to the implementation of mass notification system, as well as a pending Code Orange exercise. So lots on the go for Lisa. Up until recently, Lisa wanted to note, she was always proud to share her experience of speaking at an Ontario Hospital Association conference where Rudy Giuliani was in attendance. And it amazed her that her own session on computerized physician order entry had a full house when conference attendees could have chosen to listen to the person whose city had experienced one of the most significant terrorist attacks in history. So a little bit of an interesting story there from Lisa for you. And on a last personal note, before I hand the microphone over, Lisa wanted to note that she is a mother of two, that she is approaching an empty nest, and when she and her husband she and her husband of 30 years look forward to traveling more upon her retirement in fall 2026. So all I can say is she's going to leave a huge gap at Health Sciences North when this happens. And with all of that being said, very, very grateful to have Lisa here with us today to share her wealth of experience from Health Sciences North and talk to us about how they have experienced and used Code Aqua at her organization. So thank you, Lisa. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Misha, for having me. I love that story about Rudy Giuliani, except up until recently, it's like, oh, I like to present against him now and see if we could have more people. Anyway, let me get my screen shared. Carry on. Share.
As Lisa is pulling up her screen, I'm just going to share a last housekeeping reminder to those folks who are new. If you have questions, please ensure that you're putting them in the Q&A. I'm going to monitor those. Lisa has said if we feel there's something urgent, I will interrupt her and put that question out there to her. Otherwise, we'll just collect those and take them up at the end of the presentation. And in the meantime, the chat is open. Feel free to chat. Again, if you have questions for Lisa, please put them in the Q&A. Okay, Lisa, we see your screen, all's well.
Excellent. So thanks so much for having me today to share with you our experience with a recent flood at Health Sciences North. So this is the view from my office here in Sudbury, Ontario. That Science North that you see on the left with its distinctive silver snowflake design. And in the background, the colorful building is one of Sudbury's original hospitals, the Sudbury General Hospital, which was decommissioned when our current site expanded almost exactly 15 years ago on March 29th, 2010. Stretching across the center of that photo is Ramsey Lake itself, and it's frozen over. And we find ourselves between seasons where our skate path is closed for the season, and it's still too early to see any boaters and swimmers. Ramsey Lake is only one of the 330 lakes in the Sudbury area, and I am humbled by the knowledge that I am but one of generations who has enjoyed its beauty. Representing Health Sciences North, I acknowledge the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850 and recognize the traditional and ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples across Northeastern Ontario. This includes the territories of the the Atikaminishing, Anishinaabeg, Wanapitei First Nation, and many other Indigenous nations. The Northeast region is home to the Anishinaabeg, Métis, Cree, Moose Cree, Ojibwe, Chippewa, Oji Cree, Nipissing, and Algonquin peoples, whose histories, cultures, and contributions continue to enrich this area. I extend my deepest respect to the Indigenous peoples in this region and across Turtle Island, and remain committed to meaningful relationships that support reconciliation, respect, and healing. Miigwech. So firstly, I want to tell you a little bit about Health Sciences North. So HSN is a 633-bed teaching hospital that is the regional hospital for all of Northeastern Ontario. Some of our services include an emergency department, a level 3 ICU. We have cancer treatment, both radiation therapy and chemotherapy, labor and delivery, NICU, pediatrics, surgery, medicine, mental health and addictions programming, rehab, and many, many services to support all of these programs. We have two main sites here in Sudbury. We have the Ramsey Lake Health Center, which is our main site, and that spans over 1.5 million square feet and is made up of both new and old construction. The oldest parts of the building date back to 1975. The North Tower has 9 floors with our helipad on the roof. The Center Tower has 3 floors and our South Tower has 6. These towers house all of our inpatient beds, as well as other services. Also part of this site are the Cancer Center and Daffodil Lodge, which are extensions of our North Tower, and some outbuildings like our Acute and Reactivation Care Center, which is a separate building, but it's attached by a link hallway, and a pediatric clinic building, which is a completely separate outbuilding. The second site is our Sudbury Outpatient Center, or we call it SOC, and it houses many ambulatory services. That building itself dates back to 1956, when it was the Sudbury Memorial Hospital. A few of the floors have had recent renovations, but the majority of the building has not. HSN included a third site located 3 kilometers down the road from our main site called Kirkwood Place. That site is actually owned by North Bay Regional Health Center and houses both North Bay Regional and Health Sciences North mental health and addictions inpatients, and some outpatient services. HSN was providing all facility and security services at this site, but has transitioned that back over to North Bay Regional as of yesterday. Flooding of any size can be a big concern for a hospital, as water can be one of the most destructive forces. Water, when released, will travel the path of least resistance and seeps into any nook and cranny it can. It's not always obvious where uncontrolled water has traveled. It can cause structural damage to foundations and roofs, material damage with mold, mildew, wood rot, damage to paint and plaster and laminated materials like you'd find on countertops and cupboards, damage to insulation. It can cause swelling, disintegration of materials, rust, electrical short circuits. It has a tendency to leave musty odors and can pose a health risk depending on if mold and mildew develop and depending on the type of water. For example, it could be black water or gray water that is released. The cost to repair damage can be significant, even for the smallest of floods. These repairs will generally result in insurance claim, and most insurers require risk mitigation factors to be put in place. For example, they may ask you to do testing of flood procedures, or they may ask you to show proof of a flood emergency response plan. At HSN, we adopted the use of Code Aqua in 2019. Our past experiences with some major flooding, whether they were caused by infrastructure failures or unusual weather events, highlighted the need for a coordinated, immediate response to manage large-scale floods. It's activated when there's an influx of water that is beyond the ability of local staff to control and contain, or there is excessive steam noted in the area. I will point out that we've never experienced a Code Aqua related to a steam release, but it is built into our emergency response plan. Most times, uncontrolled water can be managed locally and no code is called. Things like a blocked drain, an overflowing toilet, a broken sink pipe where staff can easily reach the shutoff valve. Situations where teams in the area know how to stop the flow of water and can effectively manage and clean up without disruption to the system. But occasionally, the amount of water can't be handled by the unit staff, and these require a system-level response. So you might ask yourself, is this even a frequent occurrence? A quick look at the data shows the infrequency of the use of this code here at Health Sciences North. 3 events being the highest annual number, and you'll see that occurred in 2024 and in 2025 so far. Each of these events were significant enough that a system-level response was needed. I want to share one such event with you. On August 27th, 2024, HSN experienced a large flooding event that escalated to a much larger emergency. On that day, Sudbury received an unusual storm that delivered a large amount of precipitation in a very small amount of time. This precipitation overwhelmed the storm piping system at our main site in the ED, the North Tower, the link hallway to our rehab wing, plant operations, rooftop, and South Tower roof. It also triggered flooding at the Kirkwood offsite location. This flooding triggered 4 separate Code Aqua calls to switchboard in a short amount of time. 3 at the main site and 1 at the Kirkwood site. Water inside the building overflowed into a main electrical panel, which then caught fire. This triggered a code red. Subsequently, the fire caused one of our transformers to blow 2 of its 3 fuses, which then triggered multiple local normal power outages across the entire site, including our 2 CT scanners and our 2 MRIs. The widespread power outage and our response to it triggered what we called an infrastructure emergency, which we managed by using the Incident Management System, or IMS. Here's a brief timeline from the 2-day event. At 3 p.m., the first code Aqua was activated when there was a flooding near our chapel. 7 minutes later, the second code Aqua was called in the North Tower link hallway to our acute and reactivation care center. 1 minute later, uncontrolled water was pouring into our CT and our emergency surge area. A minute after that, a code Aqua was called at our offsite location at Kirkwood, which forced us to send some of the facilities and security staff working at the main site to assist in the response at that site, noting that those teams were already responding to the 3 code Aquas at this site here. Just under 30 minutes later, the code red was triggered in the electrical room caused by that electrical arcing. While security and facility teams responded to the code red, the entire building now needed to report to their emergency pools because that's our process here for code red. I want to point out the time of day. This was end of shift or shift change for many staff, but our process during code red is to not permit staff to leave just in case we need assistance with evacuation. And we also don't allow any new people to enter the building because we want to limit the number of people who we have to manage in an emergency. So staff managing the floods continued to work to clean up the water, and by 1606, the code Aquas were canceled. Because of the active code red, staff remained stuck in their emergency pools for about 1.5 hours. And by 1657, the code red was canceled. But there were still significant power outages across the system. By 1815, the decision was made to activate an incident command meeting, and an infrastructure emergency was declared. I'll provide some context for you that Health Sciences North doesn't have a code gray power failure emergency response plan. In Sudbury, our highest risk for many, many years has been a sulfur dioxide or SO2 leak from any one of our local mines. So we focused our attention and efforts on creating a code gray external air exclusion emergency response plan. But despite the lack of an emergency response plan, our facilities team has well-developed plans for managing infrastructure emergencies, like no water, no heat, no air conditioning, no power. And our clinical teams have well-developed downtime procedures for when they're unable to access equipment, including computers, which may or may not be caused by a power outage. At the outset of this event, it was suggested that a code gray be called. But knowing that the available plan would have sent staff to lock down the facility by closing doors and windows, turning off the HVAC system, because our plan is for an external air exclusion, that response would not have been appropriate. So the recommendation of emergency preparedness at the time was to declare an infrastructure emergency. Returning to the timeline, at 1915, normal power had to be shut off completely to assist facilities in the external electrical contractors in the repair. Staff were made aware and notified that downtime procedures needed to be in place overnight, with the anticipated completion of the work sometime around 9:30 the next morning. And by 6:30, the facilities team was able to reconnect to normal power, but still had some additional repairs to make. By 7:15, all electrical work was completed and teams were advised to begin booting up computers and equipment. By 9:30, the infrastructure emergency was declared over. While the electrical repair work took place, 2 additional codes were called. They happened within 10 minutes of each other, close to midnight, with minimal staff on shift, and during the full implementation of full downtime procedures. Literally, the worst case scenario emergency management people tell you to prepare for. The first of these codes occurred at 2313, when a code red was activated. This code red was particularly unusual because there was no specific location identified on the fire panel. So the team leader from security assumed the role of incident commander, and we waited for Greater Sudbury Fire to arrive. This is our usual process here for code reds. A building-wide search for the source of the fire or smoke had to be initiated. Teams were notified to do a unit room-by-room search, completing their search maps, and returned those to security. Security began searching all public areas, locked areas, and areas within the facility where there were no after-hours staff. By 24 minutes after midnight, when no smoke or fire could be located, it was determined that the alarm was triggered by a defect in the fire notification system where the original fire had started. And then Greater Sudbury Fire placed the entire complex on fire watch as a precaution. Hourly searches continued until 42 minutes after 1, when the fire panel had been repaired and Greater Sudbury Fire canceled the fire watch. While the searching was going on at 2323, the team on 6 South noted the beginnings of another flood, and they called a code Aqua. The environmental services team and facility team members who happened to be on site responded quickly, and they were able to prevent and manage the spread of water. The water was coming from residual water on the rooftop that had made its way down. Truly, when it rains, it pours. I'm hoping for a little bit of grace from the group with the information I'm sharing on this slide, because my purpose for sharing this is really for learning. And we here recognize how far from the standard IMS structure this implementation was, which is why I'm calling it IMS-ish. At 1815, when the CEO made the decision to bring together an incident command team to help manage the widespread power outages, an overhead announcement was made that there would be an incident command meeting in one of our classrooms. Between 40 and 50 people came to that meeting. VPs, directors, managers, supervisors, physician leaders, some charge nurses and charge techs, basically anybody who was in a leadership role, who was still in the building at that time, who was being affected by the power outages, showed up. The facilities director provided an overview of the problem with the electrical and the proposed solution and the timelines. Leaders took turns raising individual unit problems, what they needed help with. The group left that meeting with an action item of informing their teams and ensuring each area was going to be able to manage using their downtime procedures until at least mid-morning the next day. There were some side discussions about how long we needed to close to the region for, should ambulatory clinics be closed the next day and appointments canceled, and some logistical things related to the availability of ice and water. A smaller group agreed to meet again later in the evening around 2200, when an update on the electrical repair timelines would be better understood. By the next day, when the repair had been completed and normal power restored, we celebrated and agreed to gather some feedback from teams who debriefed after the event. Things that didn't go well with this structure was that it was unclear what action items were to be taken and by whom. No one person was taking notes, and there were definitely duplication of efforts and rework reported. But this did start our senior leadership team thinking that a structure might be helpful. In the immediate aftermath of the event, VPs, directors, and managers pulled their teams together to do what we call a hot wash. That's that immediate debrief where things are still fresh in people's minds and they're able to bring those things forward. Leaders took the time to ensure staff were safe and that their well-being was taken care of. They took some notes on things that were still outstanding to be fixed and noted anything that needed immediate attention. By early the next week, the CEO requested a debrief. So leaders were asked to conduct a cold wash with their teams. We wanted to gather feedback on the response to the event, things that went well, things that didn't, looking to draft a report to share with the senior leadership by September 19th. But there was a complication in that process. when incident reports were filed to capture the code Aquas and the code Red, those triggered our critical event process that is supported by staff and our quality and patient safety team. Here at Health Sciences North, in all situations where an incident is filed as either severe or death, the critical event process begins with an emergency phone call with the leadership of the affected areas. At the emergency phone call, if there are any outstanding pieces of information needed, action items are assigned, and the phone call is used to help determine the actual criticality of the event. An assessment template is used to help with that. If the reported event remains severe or death, a group is formed to perform a causal analysis, no later than 30 days from the date of the event. From the causal analysis, the team determines a list of action items, things that if implemented would help mitigate the risk of the event happening again, or items that would lessen the severity of the outcome if it were to occur again. This action item list is shared with our Quality of Care Review Committee, or QCRC, to ensure completion of items. And it is the most responsible director who presents those findings at the QCRC meeting. And it is that person who is held accountable to ensure those items are completed. Due to the magnitude of this particular event, it was reported as severe. This triggered the Quality and Patient Safety resource to reach out to the facilities director to initiate an emergency phone call. But because the CEO had already requested a debrief meeting, there was some confusion. In order to try to follow our established critical event process, the emergency phone call was held on September 4th. Feedback from those people invited was that it was an unnecessary step because it was obvious that this event was critical, but it did highlight the need to establish a better process for investigating and debriefing critical facility events. Our current critical event process works incredibly well for staff and patient-related events, but it's a little bit messier for these facility ones. So to navigate this event, Emergency Preparedness worked with the QPS resource to share findings from the causal analysis and the post-incident action report, and had the director of facilities present those findings at the QCRC, as well as at a meeting with senior leadership on September 19th. This event got QPS and Emergency Preparedness to start mapping out a modified process for facility events, and that work continues today. So in preparation for the report out to senior leadership, Emergency Preparedness pulled together all the information gathered from the various team debriefs, created this report. It provided an executive summary, a snapshot of the IMS org chart, a brief timeline, summary of the incident, action plan goals and objectives, the incident response summary, major strengths and opportunities for improvement, and an improvement plan. Besides the 3 key power-related action items, an additional item identified on the action plan was for emergency preparedness to provide knowledge-building opportunities to guide and support leaders with managing emergency response to large-scale events. This event really opened the eyes of our senior leader team, which is our VPs and our directors, and they were now engaged in seeking ways to build their emergency response skills. They wanted to ensure that the next time we did better. So Emergency Preparedness rolled out basic IMS training for VPs and directors. We concentrated on that group because those are the people here who take senior leader on call. Most have completed the session, and we plan to do further sessions with tabletop scenarios, allowing them to practice what they know. So you might ask, are we any better? Well, on March 12th, 2025, our SOC location had a code Aqua. It started on March 11th around 2200 when a water supply line to a sink in a bathroom on the 4th floor failed. Using security cameras to help with the timeline, we could see cleaning staff leaving that floor around 2147, and water could be seen in a 4th floor hallway beginning at 22:18, demonstrating that the failure must have occurred in that 30-minute time frame. Because this building is basically an office building with no on-site presence after 2200, water was allowed to flow for over 7 hours until the first staff member reported to work on March 12th at 5:13. By 5:54, the source of the water was isolated and repaired, but the extent of the water damage was just becoming understood. Water had seeped throughout all levels, from 4 all the way down to 0, damaging some cardiac monitoring equipment, elevators, patient files that are housed in private physician offices, and the building itself extensively. At 8:30, the senior leader on call called an initial incident command meeting, and it looked like all the training may have been forgotten, judging by the number of people presenting to the meeting and joining via Teams. But by the end of the meeting, a clear IMS structure was laid out, and I'll show that to you on the next slide. To finish the timeline, all programs and services had to be canceled on that day, and many more services and appointments had to be canceled for the following 2 days. By the end of day Friday, programs that needed to be relocated were, and we were ready to fully reopen all programs and services on Monday, March 17th. Of course, repairs to many areas are going to take the next several weeks. Some areas required remediation of asbestos. As you can imagine, the building was from 1956, but everyone displaced had a temporary home. As of today, there are still 3 floors that still have large sections under repair. With this event, we moved from IMS-ish to IMS. A clear incident commander was selected. It was handed over from the senior leader on call to one of our VPs. That senior leader on call, or the initial incident commander, remained on site at SOC working closely with the scene coordinator from building services. It was a mere coincidence that SOC happens to be the home of that senior leader on call, where the majority of programs that he oversees are run from, and his office is located there. The incident commander selected section chiefs appropriate for this type of event. They included VPs, a director, there were some managers, and she filled a gap that we noted from the last event. She actually assigned a scribe. The first operational period was set, and the next incident command meeting, which were set up virtually because the event was happening off-site, was run incredibly efficiently. Section chiefs reported out on assigned action items. They discussed next steps and assigned new action items before setting up the next operational period. Everything was documented in a shared Teams folder so that everyone could access it. This cycle was repeated 5 times until the final incident command meeting on March 14th, when command was actually handed back over to the director, who was the senior leader on call on that first day. And he continues to oversee the remainder of the repairs, but there is no further need of the large incident command structure to support that. Since QPS and emergency preparedness have yet to modify the critical event process for facility events, we knew that the same confusion was likely to occur. So because of this, emergency preparedness engaged the QPS resource very early on in the event, and we made the decision to eliminate the emergency phone call. We have had the opportunity to have a debrief with the incident command team and are still going to proceed with the causal analysis. Emergency preparedness will help collate the information from the debrief into a post-incident action report, and that will be shared with the senior leadership team. The debriefs we've had to date highlighted how much better leadership felt about managing this emergency by following the IMS structure. They felt meetings were more effectively run, having well-documented notes, made follow-up on action items easier, and are definitely facilitating insurance documentation. They all agreed that even more now, they wanted to have more practice with tabletop exercises, but their confidence has definitely been boosted. A few final thoughts. Water can be a devastating force inside a building, even if managed quickly. Code Aqua, or however your organization calls a flood, where the full IMS structure is activated, is a rare occurrence. Most floods truly are managed at that local level, and system-wide responses are not needed. But when system-wide responses are necessary, understanding the IMS structure is crucial in managing these events effectively. As with any skill, training and practice truly helps ground participants with the knowledge needed to effectively respond to large-scale emergencies. Thank you, merci, and miigwech.
So, Lisa, little did I know when we originally talked about having you come on to be a speaker, you would have a flood incident in between that request and this presentation.
Right?
So everybody who's able to attend this and watch the recording later gets to hear about both types. So, having this severe weather incident that's resulting in flooding that is external to the building having impacts on you. Talking about the residual flooding coming from the roof, for example. And then having this internal flooding incident really shows the kind of scale and scope that these incidents can cover. And that your organization has had to deal with in short succession. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And selfishly, I'm kind of glad that you guys have a second piece to bring to us for this presentation that highlights all those improvements, right? Because I know Lisa, for everybody who's on the call, had said, she was hoping to have kind of some gentle acceptance from everyone about that first response, that by the time you're going through this the second time, the goal is always to see that there's been improvements, and your organization has been able to show that there's been improvements over time, and there's lots of lessons for those of us here to take away. One thing that I wanted to ask about, because especially with the first incident where this is, inclement weather related, that's not just hitting your facility, it's hitting the entire region. What were the communications like to patients and visitors, as we get forecasts about this weather, and who knew that it was going to be as serious as it was? But what is that kind of external communication like when something like this is going on?
Yeah, so we don't always think about that particular aspect of it. Um, with the second event that happened on March 11th and 12th, because we had set up that IMS structure and we had assigned an information officer who came from our comms team, we have well-developed communications, external communications in our disaster plan. But because we don't often think to quickly assign somebody to comms, they've got those tools available to them. But our lead comms manager, he was quickly able to draft those communications to tell people, hey, this is what we're experiencing at the SOC site. They reached out to like things I wouldn't even think of, and I think it just comes from practice too. They reached out to our local transit authority. We call them GOVA, but it's like our buses that drop our patients off. We reached out to them and said, hey, just letting you know, if you're dropping anybody off at the outpatient center, it's closed for the next 3 days. They're welcome to get off the bus and come in, and we'll help navigate their appointments. But they were very helpful in redirecting people and letting people know as they were dropping people off there. Our emergency preparedness manager very quickly reached out to our City of Greater Sudbury's EOC point to just let them know we weren't asking for any help, but this is what we're experiencing right now. And, it's great for us to put them on our radar because they're able to then assemble their team quickly if we need to. I don't think, thinking back to the August event, that we did reach out to those various places. Again, it was kind of later in the day. But of course, for us, when the main site has problems, we tend to reach out to the region to let them know we're closing to transfers for the region. And that comes because we're the regional hospital here, and it requires diversion to you guys, to Thunder Bay or to Ottawa when that happens. And we try to stay close to the region for such a short period of time. But the water from the August event and where the fire was very close to our emergency department. So we needed to do that. Hopefully that answers your question.
Oh, 100%. And also, so Lisa just highlighted a point. There's extra challenges for organizations that are a regional hub like Health Sciences North for what she just articulated. If you're in a major urban center, you do have the ability to divert within the city, and that's not something that's available in Sudbury and is not available where I'm sitting in Thunder Bay. So the concept of, the big blue H on the side of the building has to stay on at all times feels like there's a bit of extra pressure there when you're the regional hub. So the fact that you're able to continue to provide services during that sort of an event is testament to the team in wanting to maintain that continuity locally, as well as supporting the region. I wanted to note a little bit too is not to be light on the situation, but it's almost more like a code rainbow for you folks last year, because little did attendees know they were going to get to hear about multiple codes in this presentation since it was pitched as just Aqua. But you went from that to the code red to ultimately like a code gray for most organizations, really highlighting that the IMS structure is there for those responses that aren't cookie cutter to our different policies, that they, cover all of these codes at once. So I thought that was not to point it out. But one thing that you didn't mention was any code green, which for attendees is when we're talking about evacuation. So did you have to actually relocate any patients while that flooding was going on?
No, we didn't. I think it was more really about the time of day. So it was happening like 3 o'clock, 3:30 around there. When the fire happened, it was like near 4 o'clock. So most of our outpatient sort of services were winding down. The one of the floors where the water was near the chapel, that's really just a walkway to various other services. What I did notice early on in the flood, though, is people's ambivalence to the emergency. People were walking through ankle deep water to get from point A to point B, trying to go through where other people were trying to coordinate. So when we rewatched the closed circuit cameras of the response, we learned a lot in terms of, I'm going to call them fire wardens, only because that's what we call them in our emergency response plan. But anytime I teach people about the emergency pools and the assignment of fire wardens, these are people really who should be assigned at exits and entrances, elevators, to control the flow of traffic. And our emergency pools do not do a great job of doing that. And in this particular circumstance with the flood in August, it would have been a significant help to have people from, the cancer center who maybe were sending patients through to x-ray for appointments to redirect them. They could have gone on the second floor. There wasn't ankle deep water on the second floor. The ankle deep water was on the first floor. They could have redirected them a different pathway had they positioned those people. So we've done some, rework with each of the emergency pools, just letting them know, hey, this is really important. And even though this is part of our the construction of our building, it may seem kooky to some people to say, why is all of your staff sitting in an emergency pool for an hour and a half in a building that is 1.5 million square feet? That sounds ludicrous. I don't disagree, but the construction of our building is such that through levels 1, 2, and 3, they are interconnected with no fire separation between them. So because of that, smoke truly could travel across the campus. So for any emergency that happens in the North Center and South Tower, that requires pooling, like a code red. Everybody has to pool, even though theoretically, the risk of a fire on the 8th floor north tower impeding something on the 6th floor of the south tower is low. Because of that construction with no fire separation doors, we pool the whole campus. But that being said, our outbuildings like our Daffodil Lodge, our Cancer Center, those are considered separate buildings. So those people don't have to pool, and the staff tend to hear the code reds overhead and go, oh, code red, main building, carry on, I can just do my work. But what we saw with this code Aqua is that perception that, oh, carry on with my work, it doesn't affect me, does not help with the traffic flow. So we did some education and rework with the team so that they're all now more acutely attuned to, yes, you can hear the code and it's awesome for you and your work that you don't have to pool, but please be cognizant when you're sending visitors and patients into the zone that we're counting on you to kind of slow down the traffic and prevent people from coming over.
So a logistical question, because we have a little bit more time here, is under your code Aqua, is it something that, especially now that you've had two different types of responses for what the trigger was and so on, is within that also like critical supplies to address the flooding or contractors that are queued up to support in this sort of response, explaining to folks here, what does it mean when you're actually calling that overhead outside of this requires an incident management team? So what are some of those other things that you've plugged into the policy that are?
So the Code Aqua emergency response plan actually doesn't have any of those details embedded in it. Our facilities team has some standard operating procedures or standards of work, whatever they would call it, for response to floods of various sizes, and they enact those, but they are not embedded in the emergency response plan. All of our emergency response plans are left at a relatively high-ish level, but our facilities team knows exactly what to do. Our environmental services team, they have spread across the entire organization, closets where there's shop vac equipment. They've modified their procedures to activate team leader people incredibly quickly. They don't wait to bring shop vacs. They bring shop vacs when they hear code Aqua from the various locations across the building. The one bit of learning from the environmental services team for the August event was the location of the flood. As they were sucking up the water and they needed a place to go and empty their shop vacs, they were like, oh, but if we just pour that down the drain, that's probably not going to help with the flooding situation. So they did happen to find an external entrance where they were kind of dumping the water outside, but away from where the storm piping systems were. But it did get them to think a little bit, gosh, if this flood happened in the ORs, which is really contained in the center of our building, where would we go to dump all this water? So they're thinking a little bit more about their procedures, but those exact details we would find them in standard operating procedures embedded at the unit level in terms of environmental services and facilities.
Yeah, and that sort of a process allows you to be a little bit more nimble, because any of the learnings I would assume that would come from these different events are much more easily captured in any of those associated SOPs. So for the teams that hear this overhead, they know that means that they have to activate these other kind of procedures on the side, and that they can quickly, pivot and update those items based on findings from your debriefs and like your post-incident reports. I wanted, if folks will permit me, to share a point about accreditation before we kind of take some last potential questions here. So I wanted to note that Accreditation Canada has some pretty robust standards that had been released just within the last year and a half. And so what does it say explicitly about Code Aqua related incidents? There's very few points where you could say, well, this is clearly saying flood because they're trying to adopt an all hazards approach. But for folks that are in healthcare on this call, a couple of things to maybe keep in mind as you're nearing your own accreditation, some things that might tie back to this type of response. So one of them is obviously early on in the standards, there's section 1.3.8. And it says the organization is supposed to provide information to patients and their families that enables them to be prepared to take care of their health needs in emergencies. And part of that is to help them be aware of what the risks are in the community, to make them aware of what alternative options for care might be, and self-care. So certainly thinking about Lisa saying that their organization in 2 different scenarios had to deal with flooding. Some of that might impact the actual transportation to come to their appointment. And some of it might be that they're now being changed to go somewhere else. So like Lisa said, working with the transit company to make sure that they were helping communicate the message in case somebody hadn't picked up on the fact that their appointment wasn't going to be able to be functioning in the same way in the same location because that location was kind of out of service. So that's one that I wanted to note, is that communication to people. It's one of those pieces that's repeated time and again under the new standards. Another thing to consider for folks on the call is section 3.1.13, which talks about having policies and procedures for shelter in place and lockdown. So if it's unsafe to leave the building, and they do note flooding and extreme weather events as being tied back to those shelter in place and lockdown considerations. So while Lisa's talking about all this intense flooding that was going on last summer, that's a community impact. And so maybe you have some folks where it's not safe for them to be traveling to and from. Thankfully, in this case, it sounds like that wasn't the case for you. But we could see that, especially with changes to climate and these more severe incidents, is that how are you making sure people are safe within the building, and that your staff and your patients and visitors aren't putting themselves at risk traveling to and from or leaving the building in the middle of something like this. And I just wanted to note one more as well, which talks about, having to have that emergency communications plan that's defining how the information about an emergency or disaster is communicated to public, whether that's media, patients, visitors, staff. So again, we talked about that after Lisa had finished sharing her slides, that again, communications comes up multiple times, and it's certainly within those new accreditation standards. So I think, like you said, there were takeaways from that first response that got applied to the response that you just went through. So, I mean, we only have a minute left. You must have done a lovely job in sharing your 2 incidents, because we didn't get any separate questions that came through the Q&A. I know that Francesco has dropped some information into the chat about the session being recorded. So certainly people can go back and review. I think there'll be lots of reflection, especially about the application of IMS and how to get that leadership team buy-in. So I really want to thank you, Lisa, for being a speaker for us today and for being candid and sharing about the actual lessons learned. I know a lot of organizations hold those things close to their chest because nobody wants to look bad, but it's not about looking bad. It's about highlighting the growth. And I think it's been a really great focusing event for your organization that's helped you improve. And we're grateful, to you for sharing all of that with us today. So thank you, Lisa. I'll turn it over to Francesco to sign us off.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just want to echo my thanks as well to you, Lisa. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. I see a lot of thanks in the chat as well. And like Misha mentioned, no questions, so you covered everything really well. So thank you so much. And thank you as well, Misha, for all of your help with the series, and for your help moderating the session and preparing everything for today. And of course, thank you to our audience for taking the time to be here and participating and joining and chatting. We're glad to see so many people still turning out to this series. So yeah, with that, thank you so much. Just a quick reminder, this is recorded, so it will be up on our YouTube channel as always in the next few hours. If you would like to review it or share it with anybody who couldn't make it to today's session. And this is still a monthly series, so we will be having another session on Wednesday, May 7th, at the same time. So please also mark that on your calendars, but you'll also receive the reminders as usual via email. And so with that, thank you one last time to everybody. It was a great session. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you all next time.
Thank you for attending, everyone.